When you hear the term grunge, certain things come to mind. Seattle, Sub Pop, the 1990s, flannel, and movie singles.
This band is unstoppable. This weekend, we rock Portland.
But what about metal? In our series Metal Evolution, we explored how grunge fits into the history of heavy metal. I spoke to musicians, producers, and other experts about how grunge killed glam, and learned why grunge is often considered a subgenre of punk or alternative. But I also discovered the many connections between bands like Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and Soundgarden, and classic heavy metal. In the end, we created a grunge branch that placed the style as a continuation of the 1970s, as though the 80s never even happened. Which of these bands have been the most influential on metal music? Who do we overlook? Are there new bands to be added? Or is grunge, as the old t-shirt says, dead? Today on Lock Horns, a debate on one of the most complicated branches of the heavy metal family tree, grunge. Welcome back to Lock Horns, Banger TV's live weekly metal debate show. If you're watching this in the archive, a reminder, we are now going live Thursdays at 4 p.m. Eastern. Well, if you guessed by the intro, yes, it's true, we're here this week to tackle grunge. Well, why? Because many of us wonder even if it is metal. And to help me with the task is the now Lock Horns veteran, super legend, Liam Cormier. How you doing, buddy?
I'm great.
Good.
Thanks for having me back.
Welcome back to the show, of course. Liam, frontman for Cancer Bats and all around grunge.
Grunge dude.
Super dude. What have you been up to?
We've just been actually starting to write a new record.
Cool.
Starting to dust off our gear, getting our brains back into metal, back into punk rock. And we're actually going to be dusting off our alter ego, Bat Sabbath.
Excellent.
And doing a bunch of Bat Sabbath gigs all throughout the year, doing a bunch of Canada, doing a bunch of UK, Europe stuff. So
awesome.
Yeah, should be awesome.
Pull out some real metal riffs.
Real metal.
Real
when
metal.
you're writing a record, you know, to go and play some Sabbath, it's just nothing makes more sense.
Just wipes the slate clean,
Yeah.
keeps it fresh. So we're tackling grunge. What do you dig about this style of
I
music?
think age-wise, this was a big one for me. I was like a teen, you know, I was born in the 80s, so like as the 90s were hitting, all of these bands were kind of like fresh and new and crazy and styles I'd never heard before.
Yep.
And combining a lot of, you know, like Sabbath and AC/DC and all of this stuff that I was into and punk. And I don't know, I just found it was like such a really interesting genre.
And a bit, you know, the classic narrative, I guess, of grunge was it was the alternative to the LA sound, which was huge throughout the 80s. I mean, was that something meaningful for you?
I think for me being so young, so in the 80s, I was like, you know, 5, 6. So Guns N' Roses, a little bit of that stuff. Maybe you'd hear like your parents playing The Cult. You know what I mean? So I feel like there was a lot of that maybe I
grunge because it was a bit of an antidote to that whole MTV-driven thing. I know for me, it was certainly a big alternative. I was kind of down a deep well of extreme metal at that time, for better or for worse. But there was, I think, a kind of real rawness in this sound that I appreciated.
Yeah, and it was very real. I think that was a huge part of it. It was like we, as kids, saw guys wearing plaid shirts, riding skateboards, like hanging out the same way that we did.
For sure. And I couldn't escape it because I grew up in Victoria, so you could almost hear Soundgarden crossing the Strait of Juan de Fuca, whether we liked it or not. And I did have wool socks and hiking boots, so I guess I fit the bill.
Yeah, by default, I think being Canadian, we were already very grunge.
That's right.
Just put on your dad's clothes.
We had no choice.
So
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, enough about us. We, of course, also need to hear from you. Lock Horns, as always, is driven by the comments of all of you who care about grunge or don't care about grunge for that matter. And joining us this week, we've got a lot of Americans in the house. We've got Maryland, New Hampshire, Texas, California, Missouri, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Alaska, Florida, Alabama, Colorado, South Carolina, upstate New York. You never hear downstate New York, Oregon, and Seattle, Washington. All right. the home, the ultimate home. We got a bunch of Brits. We got London, Leeds, Bristol, and Chester. And from the rest of the world, we've got people joining us from Portugal, Colombia, Lithuania, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, Sweden, Germany, Israel, Italy, and Poland. And a reminder to all of you, we want your input on this chart. We want to hear your thoughts on what makes grunge metal, what makes it not metal. If you think bands need to be removed or added from the grunge branch, tell us. This is your chance. And to help us, of course, is the one and only, is Lisa Ladiseur. Welcome, Lisa.
Oh, thanks, Sam. Glad to be here.
And she, of course, is equipped with the mightiest sound in all of metal, the cowbell from hell.
I don't know about that.
Ah, it's as mighty as we can possibly get in our DIY studio here in the Banger Bar. Okay, so let's get into a bit of a definition. We'll put on our metal expert, our thinking caps, our smart caps here. And what do you think defines this music?
Well, we were talking about that before too, because there's the real, like, is it solos? Is it the style? Is it, I guess that's the tough part I feel about grunge, because it is such a mash of kind of everything. And it's taking those like different influences and trying to make something new out of it. So I don't know if there's any like quintessential. I liked, I guess, some of the ways that it's very fuzzed out. Definitely, like, you would always have the driving drum beat as like a huge point. And then usually choruses are huge. So either screamed or whatever, loudly sung. That was always like the soft verse versus the like really...
You got the kind of Pixies quiet, loud, quiet kind of song structure. Which,
I guess, but then some of them, as we were saying, some have solos, some have none, some are very punk in that. But I think those are maybe some of the real, like, kind of... For sure.
I mean, and I guess we've also talked about, you know, a bit more of a punk hardcore mentality, aesthetic, attitude, whatever we want to call it, you know. And we talked about guitar solos, and you're right, like, there were solos, but for some reason in my mind, it doesn't feel like the solo means in grunge what it means in the rest of metal. It isn't like this heroic moment that everyone's waiting for.
I mean, we were bringing it up. Like, I feel like Pearl Jam has, like, Stone Gossard's wearing the cowboy hat. He's, like, kicking out a solo. You're like, okay, like, that's full on. But
there are some moments.
Yeah, I can't think of, like, you know, like, the memorable Melvins solo. You know? So, yeah.
Maybe the point here is it's not, like, the essential ingredient. It's like you can't be a metal band without having a guitarist that can solo. You can actually be a grunge band without that person.
Or without even a guitarist.
Hey,
you know?
And that's unthinkable in metal. So I think we're getting somewhere here. And the complicating factor too, and we'll get to this, is there are bands within this genre that are quite metal, and then there are bands we could argue are not very metal at all. So clearly people were smoking a lot up in the Pacific Northwest and weren't really sure where to put their foot down. In any case, enough of that. Every episode of Lock Horns, we like to establish the legend of the genre, the band that we could claim that this would not exist without them. Liam Cormier, I give you the floor. Do you want to tell us what this band is?
The legendary band that we've all kind of decided should go at the top of the tree. And I'll move some.
Thank you, Vanna.
To the side. We all agreed that it was Melvins. Which I think also in our world of metal, I think also is where a lot of people associate at least grunge in this world. Like Melvins being, okay, obviously a grunge band, influenced all the grunge bands, but also very metal, very sludge, very stoner, even psychedelic sometimes. So I definitely think of them as being the legend. And also, all of these bands will cite Melvins as the reason why they started.
Very important factor, and you know, it's a well-told story that a lot of these bands from this area actually saw the Melvins even before they had started their own bands or when in the early years of their bands, and so these were almost like the granddaddies of the scene, just that little bit older, that they were doing something that I think a lot of these bands looked up to.
Yeah, and definitely you can hear in like tone wise, like with Mudhoney, Nirvana, like
Yeah.
so much of that is just like, whoa, what were those?
That
guys
super
doing?
sludgy, almost more 70s kind of Sabbathy, bottom-heavy guitar tone.
Yeah, totally.
Whereas if you were playing super fast, that tone would completely fall apart. You'd be like, where are we?
And I think that's maybe where the solo is almost more in like a stoner rock kind of way. Like
Sure.
When they do have them, it's just like those lazy kind of bends.
Drawn out.
But the like punishing drums.
Sure.
Like huge drum sounds. Also driving the songs. And I would say that same song structure of the like quiet, loud.
Right, for sure. Melvins, undoubtedly the legend, according to us in the Banger Bar. And several years ago, when we created the series Metal Evolution, we did an episode on grunge, and I sat down with Dale and Buzz about the Melvins and about grunge and about its relationship to metal, and this is what they had to say. In terms of, first of all, metal, what bands were you into when you guys were just getting started?
When I joined the band, I was into Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, the Killers record. I remember first hearing Unleashed in the East and just thinking it was unreal. It's like I couldn't believe music could be so heavy. And, definitely that drummer, Les Binks, was a big influence on me,
And how about you, Buzz? What metal bands were you into in that time?
I like the same kind of stuff. Same kind of Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, Venom, Sabbath to a lesser degree. But at that time, I was more into the Dio era of Sabbath.
And what about punk, Buzz? What punk bands were you interested in at that time?
Well, I liked originally like Sex Pistols, Clash, and then later Black Flag, stuff like that. TSOL. Lots of bands, lots of punk bands mixed in together with Van Halen and other things of that nature. It's a nice hybrid.
Is grunge metal?
In the last 10 years, I've realized that what we're doing is what Captain Beefheart would do if he played heavy metal.
Right.
That's what we're doing. That's a mentality.
I remember one of the first times I saw the Melvins. They're opening for Metal Church in Aberdeen. And, the audience didn't get the band at all. And I remember one guy yelling out, play some heavy metal! And I'm just sitting there thinking, like, doesn't get any more heavy metal than this right here. This is heavy metal. This is the heaviest metal. You don't know what heavy metal is if you're yelling that out.
When you guys got signed to Atlantic, why did you get signed, do you think, thinking back?
Nirvana.
Yeah, certainly.
Absolutely.
And it was because of all those bands, for sure. And, I know some labels were looking for, a band from Seattle that they thought would do good,
And they signed everybody under the sun at that point.
Yeah. I mean, this label had one, so that, the next label had to have one. But with Atlantic, it was a little bit of a different story because they knew that we weren't really going to become a Nirvana type of band.
They knew, but they also didn't know.
Oh yeah, of course they're like, well, it could happen.
We were just laughing the whole time, like,
Yeah, I had a friend that worked at Tower Records, and he got excited because this teenage girl came in and bought a Melvins record. And about 20 minutes later, she comes back in. She's like, I want to exchange this. I want to get my money back. I was like, well, why? You didn't like it? Well, no, I bought it because the Nirvana guys were saying that they really liked the Melvins a lot. But this doesn't sound anything like Nirvana. It's like, yeah, it doesn't sound anything like Nirvana. Those guys like them a lot, but no, you're right.
Love that story there from Dale. Sort of hits right on the nose what a lot of the grunge bands were going through at that time. And also what I like about that clip is clearly these guys hugely influenced by a lot of metal bands and like a real big range from Venom to others. But they said we were metal plus Captain Beefheart, which I thought was pretty on the nose.
Yeah, I feel like Buzz is trying to like maybe throw out the like, oh no, I was in Van Halen.
Yeah.
Oh, I only like Dio era Sabbath. And you're like, okay.
All right, let's see what the board has to say. Melvins, here we go. Delicious Dishes. The only band I see on this list with a big influence on metal is the Melvins. That's an interesting point. How many of these bands we've been talking about that actually went on to influence metal? Good question.
Okay.
Ben Fitz, the Melvins brought slow Black Flag punkness with alt rock and doomy metal first. That's what grunge is. And Yard Bumofo says that Melvins, more so than Nirvana, is the most influential because their sound more than any other band is heard in almost all extreme music. Diego Diablo says the Melvins sound is this big, gruff, sludgy, muddy sound. That's the sludge sound. It's also the grunge sound in a less extreme way. Raphael Fireblade, the best power metal name ever, says that Melvins should be removed. They pioneered sludge metal, so a little bit of kind of, are they sludge? Are they grunge? Maybe they're overlapping. Josh Hunt, Melvins need to go. Too sludgy and don't really self-identify with grunge. Interesting point. Do you need to self-identify to be part of it? Not sure. And lastly, we got Cassidy Robinson. Melvins may have worn a few hats in their day, and they've had a big influence all over the spectrum of mid-slow tempo metal, but their home is and always will be grunge. And if Buzz had ever taken Cobain to that Black Flag show, history would have been forever altered. Any thoughts on that? I mean...
Yeah, I like the idea of people looking at how the Melvins then influenced metal later. You know, down the road.
Right.
And who, you know, was taking a note from them. I mean, I definitely, like, Cancer Bats, we look at Melvins as, like, a huge influence on our band still. So, I don't know. It's interesting.
And again, a kind of a really good point there, I think, is, and we'll park it for now, but how many of these bands actually went on to influence metal is another question altogether. Yes, Lisa?
We're going to talk about that in a second, but I have a couple of comments I thought were interesting in response to your grunge has no solos.
Here we go. Stephen J. Solos in grunge are used like bridges in most songs. That's kind of an interesting point. And the Gordo Loco, Kim Thale, solos, of course. Kim Thale, solos. Much respect and big homage to Kim, one of my favorite guitarists, certainly from this period of music.
And not surprisingly, people are debating the Melvins, and people are also wondering why we didn't pick Nirvana as the legend. We have a lot of comments about that.
Okay, well, let's get into it. Here we go. Nirvana and Pearl Jam. I think we were expecting there to be some debate about whether these bands even belong in a metal family tree. Here we go. Robert Walton. Let's be real here. Nirvana is the legend of this genre and a rock legend in general at this point. I doubt people would be paying this much attention if it weren't for Nevermind, a landmark record that continues to inspire young rock bands worldwide. Josh Hunt, well, Nirvana has to clearly be the legend band on the list because the genre would not be what it was without them. I could argue that the genre wouldn't even be there if it wasn't for the Melvins. But anyway, Daniel Merwin, seriously though, if Nirvana isn't the legend, I'm going to dress up in flannel, docks, torn jeans, enter the banger bar, and swing around a lefty guitar by the strap until the place is destroyed. I don't know why it's a lefty. But
yeah, Daniel, fired up. Fired up.
We locked the doors.
Yeah. Thoughts on Nirvana and what people are saying here?
I guess, like, in what we were saying, like, if there, or what you just said too, if there was no Melvins, there would be no Nirvana. So
where do you start?
Yeah.
I guess.
Is it chicken or the egg?
Yeah.
Yeah. For sure, Nirvana's like the biggest. Of this genre. Them and Pearl Jam are the two by far bands you think of. But again, if it wasn't for the band that made Nirvana want to form. So wouldn't you say,
And we get into murky water too when people are saying the most important band in the genre is arguably even a metal band, and I think that this is where it gets complicated with this style called grunge. It was clearly a mix of a lot of things. So,
and I guess in the same way that a lot of people are like, Melvins are a sludge band. So getting angry about that.
Anyway, we lock horns. Yes, Lisa.
Mystery solved thanks to where'd he go? Wasteland Scavenger. It was because Kurt was left-handed.
Thank you for helping us out.
Thank you.
Well done.
We love the nerds.
Daniel Kaye says Nirvana came in 5 years after the game was created. There's a good point there. Let's not forget Soundgarden. Where are you? Formed in '84, I think. Some of these bands go way. Of course, Mother Love Bone was there. Green River was there. Mudhoney. They're long before a Nirvana and a Pearl Jam. So we gotta keep that in mind. Lisa, we moving on from Nirvana?
We have to move on.
We have to move on.
But I just want to say that this is now the first time with the Melvins topping the grunge chart that they're not a legend in two Lockhorns charts.
Is that a first?
They're also the legend in sludge. So
double legend.
Double legend.
I think
a legendary legend.
Yeah.
Can you get more legendary? Anyway, I digress. What are we doing next, Lisa? Are we doing Alice in Chains, bands to go? Where are we going?
Before we can add more bands, we need to make sure that we still want all of these bands. So we're going to talk about bands that maybe don't deserve to be on the chart, actually.
Okay, well, here we go. Raphael Fireblade is back, saying that Mother Love Bone did not influence grunge, and they did not influence any of the Seattle grunge bands. Interesting. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, they definitely influenced a lot of like Seattle grunge bands. And we're around the same, like playing shows with Soundgarden all the time.
Yeah.
Obviously, a direct influence to Pearl Jam.
For sure.
So, I would say that Mother Love Bone is one of those ones that kind of cross over. You were saying they were very glam in a lot of their early days and a lot of their influence. So
yeah, I mean, I would say it was such a small scene. I've had the opportunity to interview a lot of the bands from this scene, particularly the guys in Alice in Chains and Soundgarden, and you know they talk about the importance of Mother Love Bone. People forget how small the scene was and how isolated the scene was, and so in many ways it's almost impossible to think that a band like Mother Love Bone wouldn't have influenced any of the other grunge bands, because what other shows were these guys going to?
Yeah, like,
you know?
I feel like, you could kind of have that line of like Mother Love Bone, Soundgarden, Mudhoney kind of being the bands that were playing around the same time as the Melvins.
Yeah, and you can almost do there's almost like a personalized chart, like Melvins play Seattle, blah, 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 Kurt goes to see Melvins, and then Mother Love Bone over here, and then this guy, it was so small that it's almost like we could pin it down to specific dates and people.
Yeah, if the main band is Nirvana, you could just look at his diary for what shows he went to. And came back and wrote songs.
Yeah, we need Kurt's calendar. We need Kurt's calendar. Lisa, bands to go. Stephen J says Mother Love Bone has to stay. I think we're agreeing here in the Banger Bar. And Mikhail Lurksundi says Mother Love Bone is the connection between Guns N' Roses and grunge. That's a pretty interesting comment, given what we were saying about the glamminess of Andrew Wood and that angle. Yes, Lisa?
Yeah, I think this might be the first time on Lockhorns that people think the chart is right. They're not asking us to take anybody off.
Right. Well, there's a first for everything.
Grunge is the first time you nailed it.
Okay, Lisa, are we moving on with more bands to remove, or what's the chat saying right now?
Right now, people are pretty happy, which means it's time for the guest choice.
Oh, guest choice.
Oh yeah, I was like, what was my guest choice again? We've been talking about so many bands and thinking about so many stuff. So my guest choice was Alice in Chains.
Okay. And why?
Why? Because I think, again, I was respecting the world of metal that we were also talking about grunge within. And I think Alice in Chains, along with Soundgarden, is one of those bands that is grunge but toured with metal bands.
Sure.
A lot of people will argue has a heavy metal influence. I think especially when put beside the Melvins.
Yeah.
It has that super fuzzed out, heavy guitar sound.
Yeah.
But again, toured with, bands like Anthrax. You were saying that they did the Big Four.
Yeah, the Clash of the Titans tour. Yeah, I mean, the story there, it's been told a few times, but they got added to the Clash of the Titans tour when Death Angel got in their bus accident, couldn't do the tour. And as far as I understand, and maybe the board can verify this, is that it was actually, I think, Dave Mustaine from Megadeth who said we should add this band Alice in Chains. And I remember when I interviewed Kerry King for Metal Evolution, and I think the feeling at first was like, who's this? The Seattle band, what's going on?
Yeah.
But these guys just got pelted and harassed the whole tour, and then by the end of the tour people were loving their music. I think by the end of the tour they actually had music videos and they were a popular band.
Yeah.
So just in the scope of that tour, you sort of saw this trajectory of the anti-grunge sentiment in the metal world too. These guys are pretty good.
Yeah, to being maybe this does fit in.
Yeah, maybe they do qualify. Anyway, let's go to the board to see what people have to say about Alice in Chains. Eli Martin Unger says Alice in Chains is the only grunge band I see as being metal. All right. Actor Root says that the only grunge act that I can stand, is Alice in Chains, the only band with true metal roots in comparison to the others. I would argue Soundgarden needs to be added as well. But anyway, Levi McIntyre says the one band I feel that should be removed is Alice in Chains. Just because Alice in Chains came from Seattle and were around at the time, to me, doesn't mean that they were grunge. They had more of a Black Sabbath influence to them. For my money, I would put them in doom metal. Okay, they have all of the ingredients of a doom metal band: dark lyrics, slow tempos, aggressive and heavy blues-based riffs, and a moody atmosphere. I suggest you play side by side the song "Rooster" from Dirt and St. Vitus, the Lost Feeling from Born Too Late album, and you will see some similarities. Okay, so some people don't even think Alice in Chains is grunge, but it's just getting more confusing for me right now. I don't know how to handle that, but I would say that Soundgarden, people need to remember actually too, that Seattle did have some metal bands at that time. Of course, Metal Church is from Seattle. There was a fantastic thrash band from Seattle called Forced Entry, revealing my Pacific Northwest roots here. And, you know, the Alice in Chains guys definitely had their own sound, but for my money, they're pretty metal. I'm with you.
And I would agree also what you were saying on the Soundgarden tip. I feel like you could do either kind of band, but I was only allowed one choice. So hey, I played it safe.
You couldn't go like Alice in Garden. That wasn't allowed.
Alice in Garden
Sound
with
in
a
Chains.
side of helmet.
Here we go. James McPhee, we got a Nevermind comment here, Lisa. Are we backing up to Nirvana or?
No, it's related.
Oh, is it?
Trust me, Sam.
Nevermind is what Nirvana great height was, but what do you listen to today? It's more like to be Alice in Chains. I see. Suggesting there's some longevity, some timelessness to bands like Alice in Chains. I mean, for obvious reasons, you know, Alice in Chains is still around as a band, and so they're able to tour and continue to put out records. Yeah, and anyway, I'm wondering what the chat has to say about Soundgarden, and lo and behold, Lisa, we've got some Soundgarden comments here.
Just trying to keep one step ahead.
Thank you. Chris Millam says, this is a metal chart. Thank you, Chris Millam. Soundgarden opened for Metallica several times. I saw them and they influenced the metal scene.
I saw them.
I saw them. Don't fuck with me. HR the Flame Blades Wielder says, I always felt like Soundgarden's early material was similar to the hardcore bands that mix with sludge metal like Code Orange and Cancer Bats.
True.
In the room. One of the bats in the room. Maybe they belong in crossover. Matthew Levin's Super Unknown, diverse, complex, and cerebral. A maelstrom, good metal word, of influences. Black Sabbath, fuck the Beatles, and this was the baby. Hello, it's good. HR Flame Blades is back. Soundgarden and Alice in Chains are alternative metal bands. Nirvana is a punk rock band. Pearl Jam and Green River are alternative rock. The Melvins are sludge metal, and Mother Love Bone is glam.
Boom.
Thoughts on Soundgarden?
Done.
Straight.
Back it up.
Enough wielding the blade. Yeah. All right, we got the point.
He's like, again, Soundgarden open for metal bands.
Yes.
Definitely looked super metal.
Yeah.
I would say like really, you know, the long hair, the leather jackets.
Yep.
And yeah, the sound definitely was
for sure.
First bunch
You
of
liked
records.
and
I
liked this band?
love Soundgarden.
Yeah.
I still, you know, go
For
back
sure.
and jam Motorfinger all the time.
Fantastic record. My favorite band on this list by a long shot.
Oh, okay.
And an interesting thing about Soundgarden too is I think that and we kind of unraveled this a bit in the grunge episode, is that they kind of became more metal with time, because you listen to the early records, they're really kind of jagged and angular and pretty like lo-fi production, like much more of a punk vibe. But once you get into Bad Motorfinger and Super Unknown, the sort of these mammoth guitar riffs start coming to the fore. And odd time signatures, of course, which gives it kind of that proggy feel. But I will go on about Soundgarden. Why? Because I care. Yes, Lisa?
No, you won't, because I have the bell.
You have the bell.
And also, it's time. We've been talking for like 29 minutes and we haven't added any new bands. And so I would like to ask you, Sam Dunn,
Yes.
why you made it a grunge chart and left off all the women bands.
Oh my goodness.
Harsh.
Sausage Party's been revealed. ladies, let's go to the board so I can dodge that question. But seriously, Alex Ingram, 2 bands that are not from Washington but help define the look, sound, and attitude. L7 and Babes in Toyland both deserve serious consideration. Black Wolf Williams, I think L7 needs to be there too. Stealth's Metal, L7 needs to be there. Danny Calais says L7, great mix of grunge and Motorhead metal. And Zach Dunn, beautiful name. Say what you will about Courtney Love as a person, but I do think Hole should be listed. So L7,
I
getting some
agree.
love there. Absolutely. I think, going back to this chart, we kind of picked the bands that we thought that were the most influential at that time, but definitely I think L7 was an oversight. Any comments on this band? Are you a fan?
I am and was a fan of L7.
Cool.
L7 actually got me into like tons of other female-fronted bands.
Cool.
Not specifically grunge, but more into the whole Riot Girl,
Right.
Bikini Kill,
Yeah.
like that whole kind of world.
Cool.
But definitely, yeah, thought they were an awesome band. And I would agree with like the whole comment as
Yeah.
well, because I felt like those two and the 7-Year Bitch, I felt like there was a lot of
Let's put Hole up here
good
then.
female-fronted
Yeah, for sure.
grunge.
What about Babes in Toyland?
Babes in Toyland?
Babes in Toyland, I actually, like, I know them, but at the time I didn't listen to. So that's where,
Yeah.
no beef, but
Yeah.
that just wasn't one of the bands that I jammed. So I can't,
Okay.
I'm not going to pretend to be an expert.
There you go. We've got some ladies on the board, Lisa. Not bad for a metal show.
As there always should be.
There always should be. I mean, it is one of the few genres on this street
It's true.
where women made a significant contribution.
Yeah, and I think that was like a really interesting part of what was going on in the 90s, that there was not only just a lot of all-girl bands, but then that a lot of bands had women playing in them,
for sure.
in the grunge scene.
Yep. And we'll get to Smashing Pumpkins. There was
Yeah.
That's the debate. Anyway, yes.
Time for some random suggestions from the chat. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say.
We
about
love
these bands.
random here in the Banger Bar. Let's go. Diego Diablo, U-Men. Yeah, were the first major band in the Seattle punk scene. They were noisy, frantic, and a break from Northwest punk bands like Wipers and Poison Idea influenced everybody. Of course, there was a very influential compilation from the Seattle area, which I'm blanking on the name. The U-Men, I think, were part of that. Steve Englehart, list lacks the shred gods of grunge. Dinosaur Jr., J. Maskus Rips, HR the Flame Blades Wielder, Temple of the Dog should also be mentioned. Members of Mother Love Bone and Soundgarden, 2 of the biggest bands in the genre. And Josh Hunt says that I think that Temple of the Dog needs to be here. One album that influenced tons of bands later, and you gotta love Chris Cornell, definitely. Jason French says I would class Puddle of Mud as grunge / alternative metal. The first band I ever got into, Puddle of Mud's first 2 albums are really grungy. Mainly in later albums, they became much more radio friendly. So a lot of ideas. We got U-Men, Dinosaur Jr., Temple of the Dog, Puddle of Mud. Thoughts?
I guess it's tough because, there's a bunch of grunge bands that I feel like we were even talking about. Smashing Pumpkins that you mentioned.
Yep.
But where it goes back to, this is like a metal chart.
Sure.
So that's where, like, I think Dino is definitely a grunge band.
Right.
But are they metal?
Yeah.
don't think so. Like, I
Yep.
think if people would argue that Nirvana is not metal,
Yeah.
like you would say, well, Dinosaur Jr. definitely isn't.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So more of a punk influenced band. So
Yeah.
that's where I guess it gets
It's tricky.
tough.
It's not
Yeah.
science. I mean, we've got a punk hardcore branch on the
Yeah, and
tree,
even
so
that's
it's
just,
like,
you know.
I think it's about acknowledging that there was enough elements of this to make it metal, and obviously that they influenced bands. But what about Temple of the Dog? One album? Do you get to be on here with one album?
And a fun supergroup. I think, again, especially if we're leaving off some bands because they're not exactly... Because, I mean, we haven't even really talked... Pearl Jam's not off the list, but it's not like we've even talked about Pearl Jam. Or, again, I would argue Smashing Pumpkins are more influential than Temple of the Dog.
And back to the first one, I mean, U-Men, again, influential, important, grunge, one of the early bands, but metal, not quite sure. And Puddle of Mud, I would personally slot them in the post-grunge kind of category. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would definitely... I think Puddle of Mud was around when a lot of these bands had either stopped playing. Again, I think in that post-grunge where I know you were saying like Nickelback, kind of some bands like that live. Yeah, Puddle of Mud, I would say, is in that
in that post-grunge era.
Post-grunge world.
We mentioned the N-word. Is that going to create a shitstorm?
No, I'm
not
just
sure.
laughing because some people are like going hungry in the chat.
There we go. Okay, well,
about
Puddle of
Temple of the
Mud.
Dog.
We're gonna leave off You Men. We're gonna leave off Temple of the Dog. You know, does one album make a band? I'm not so sure. Puddle of Mud, I think we both agree, belong in post metal. Lisa.
So we talked about post-grunge, which is, I don't know, is that even a genre? It is on our tree.
We made it.
And we put the bands there that came after the fall of grunge.
Yes.
But a lot of people in the chat think that one band from post-grunge should be included here, and that's Stone Temple Pilots.
Okay, let's go to the board. Stone Temple Pilots, Raphael Fireblade, Stone Temple Pilots should be added. Their album Core is definitely one of the most important grunge albums. Also, they had a little bit of influence on country, more than any of the bands in the genre. That might disqualify you. But anyway, Taj Barbado says that STP has to be added because they are so angry and have a very grunge feel, and they are awesome. And Daniel Pereira da Silva says Stone Temple Pilots were so important and much more than those little crappy things like Hole. Ooh, Scott Wieland not being mentioned is just not fair. STP, one of the greats. What do you think, Liam?
I definitely, I think STP should be added.
Yep.
I think, harsh on Hole. But
A bit, yeah. I mean, not a Seattle band. Maybe that's why people don't tend to include them. I mean, it's kind of like the Smashing Pumpkins thing too, like Chicago a little bit later, but not really.
No, I would say Stone Temple Pilots, Smashing Pumpkins, that was all going on at the same time.
For sure.
And again, like Dinosaur Jr., even though they were, not from Seattle specifically, I think it still makes sense. I guess the argument, though, is how much of it has to do with metal, and that's where I get confused, because we could talk about that side of, we could talk about the Doughboys from Canada, we could get into Canadian grunge or indie rock and all that stuff, but I'm like, but I don't consider any of that stuff metal.
Yeah, well, to an earlier point that Lisa made, maybe we need to create two. We need grunge metal and we need grunge. I don't know. We might be splitting hairs, but that's what we do on Longhorns.
That's where we're
we got some more comments here for STP. Ollie Ray, yes, put STP on the grunge chart. Chiseled and Stoned says that Stone Temple Pilots are not a grunge band. They co-opted the look and some of the sound, but were way too commercial. Not sure about that. Nirvana sold a lot of records. JD Knott said, 147 says, I love STP, but they're alternative. Core is the only album that could be considered grunge. Stephen J says STP is the archetype of alternative rock. Radio Ready Rock for the 90s, not bad songs and super catchy. Benjamin Lavoie says, if you put STP, you're going to have to put early Matchbox 20. It's getting complicated here. Clearly there is this difficult zone where is it grunge, is it alternative rock, is it metal?
Yeah, and I think
tricky.
Like you were kind of laughing, like to bring up a band's commercial success and that making it not grunge.
Not sure about that.
Or also one thing that we've kind of forgot about is how a lot of this was called alternative.
It's true.
So
it's true.
Yeah, is that where grunge is specifically Seattle and then everything else is considered
And admittedly, when we
alternative?
made the original chart, we created this whole other thing called hard alternative, which is really not a term that's stuck.
I think
we may have made it up.
You made that up.
But there was this, there's Faith No More, there was Jane's Addiction, there was Smashing Pumpkins, and more. This sort of amorphous, you could argue, Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Yeah.
This amorphous where it was heavy on some level, guitar driven, but bringing in elements of funk and alternative music. And all that stuff.
Yeah, like Butthole Surfers, now that I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, Husker Du.
Yeah.
Confusing times. Confusing times.
It's a tough time
Yes,
for us.
Lisa.
All right, well, before we go down the alternative rabbit hole, we have one more suggestion
Okay.
to add to the grunge chart.
Here we go. Raphael Fireblade wields again. Stone Temple Pilots.
No, that's not it.
Oh,
That's not it. Sorry.
Where is
Here
it?
we are. Here we are.
Here we go. Chiseled and Stoned. What about Helmet? Should they be included? Maximilian Wozniak says, Helmet's staccato riffing almost makes them too disciplined to fall into this genre. We have a Helmet.
Yeah,
Magnet. What do you think?
I would argue that Helmet should be included in grunge in this conversation. Again, because I think they definitely are influenced by the Melvins, are
Sure.
within that same scene. They influenced Kurt.
Yeah.
And were around at the same time.
I would agree that there's a heaviness to, Helmet were heavy and heavier than arguably some of the bands even here already. So from a metal perspective, that feels like they belong even more.
Yeah, and when you went into a store at the time, like Betty, when that record came out, was next to, like Melvins and Alice in Chains and all that stuff.
Sure.
So.
Yeah. Well, there we go. Helmet's been added. Prong was the other name I meant to mention. Hard alternative, but I'm not allowed to go there. Lisa.
I feel like we've tackled all the bands that have come up in the chat, including
Yes.
Smashing Pumpkins, which you mentioned doesn't quite belong here.
Yes.
Something just came in. Are you kidding me? Helmet are the godfathers of post-metal.
Oh my goodness.
So Helmet is disputed.
Helmet is disputed.
At this point.
Okay.
But
We can give it a question
as
mark.
being
We like
that,
question marks.
that they belong more in alternative metal.
Okay.
But I
fair
think
enough.
what we want to do before we wrap the show is spend some time talking about what happened to grunge and if it has a lasting influence. Is it alive or is it
Yeah.
just a time and place scene?
Important
you know?
debate. We talked about it a bit before, Liam. Like say the new wave of British heavy metal, which has the word wave in it, which suggests it's a moment in time in a particular place. Grunge, we could argue, is somewhat similar, that it was a sound that was a product of a certain combination of influences that largely came out of one city. Other cities were there too. And then we could argue that it kind of disappeared. Do you have thoughts on what was grunge's influence, do you think?
I think that's tough. Looking at it as a specific time, I think that that definitely makes more sense to me. Again, in a metal context, I was gonna say I think there are new bands that sound like 90s grunge.
Yeah.
And while maybe those guys listen to metal or they used to be in metal bands, I don't think they would even classify themselves as being metal influenced.
Right. And what are some of those bands?
Some of those bands like Super Heaven, Citizen, Violent Soho from Australia. I think some of those bands sound a lot like, their influence from these 90s grunge bands.
Right.
But I don't think any of them would consider themselves metal.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
In that sort of world.
Yeah.
Or
I hear you. Well, I think that's the big question. Grunge obviously was to some extent a product of metal and was metal, but whether these bands actually created an influence within metal, not so sure.
Yeah.
Is one argument it was so ubiquitous, so powerful that if you had a guitar in the mid-90s and you wanted to play music, you were influenced by one of these bands. But it might have gone more, I hate to say it, the Creed.
Yeah, and that's kind of where
direction.
Or it's tough. As I would say, if you would consider Cancer Bats a metal band, we're heavily influenced by Melvins, Alice in Chains, and Soundgarden.
Right.
You can definitely hear that in our last record.
Right.
And that's what we all grew up listening to. I think you could even say the same for guys who are in a lot of metal bands.
Right.
Whether or not it comes through. You talk to the guys from Lamb of God, and they're listening to Alice in Chains while they're hanging out. You know what I mean? So it's like that. Those bands are obviously.
A song in the new Lamb of God record that kind of sounds.
Yeah,
a bit
right.
Alice in
That's
Chains.
kind of where I'm like, you guys are definitely down with all of this stuff.
Yeah.
But your band doesn't sound like Alice in Chains.
No, it's true. It's true. It was so big, I think it seeped into the water pretty much everywhere.
Yeah.
To some extent. The board. The board has an opinion.
Of course the board has an opinion.
The board has an opinion. Craig Mailman down the road behind me in the studio says grunge was dead by the time Nirvana came out. Mr. Nakonito says grunge is dead. It evolved into stoner. Diego Diablo, grunge was a massive influence on desert stoner rock. It's a good point, actually. Queens of the Stone, which evolved into stoner metal. Soundgarden, Melvins led to Caius, Sleep, which led to Electric Wizard. That's actually a really good point. Joel Harold, grunge has had a lasting impact, but I'm wondering if it would have a revival. Mentioned Cloud Nothings. When Cloud Nothings started to get some attention, music critics were asking if there would be a grunge revival. Of course, let's bear in mind that Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, and several other bands on these charts are still going
Still
strong.
playing, yeah.
And they still resonate with audiences. But I think that's actually a really good point about the desert bands. I hadn't thought about that, definitely. Yes, Lisa.
I think we have our quote of the week to wrap things up today.
No way.
Yeah,
We made it? That went fast. We're just getting started.
I know.
Here we go. Quote of the week, according to Lisa Ladesseur, is from Superjoint. Here we go. The media tried their best to kill heavy metal when grunge was popular. Some bands helped in the process by crapping on metal bands when being interviewed. A waste of time. We are all still here. Yes, we are.
Thanks, Superjoint.
A moment of clarity from Superjoint. Much appreciated. Well, we did something.
Yeah. I like that we threw up some names. I like that we rustled some feathers.
We did. We got some ladies on the board. We kind of opened up the post-grunge thing, which is on the chart already. But really, I think there's general consensus that the chart was in pretty good shape. Most of the bands we've got here are there and there to stay. And, you know, I think really the conclusion here is that grunge was so gigantic that it didn't necessarily go on to have a specific influence in metal, but it just
just an overall
seeped into everything imaginable.
And I think you kind of put it best. These were weird times for music in general, where I think a lot of things just sort of existed, and a lot of journalists were trying to just put names onto things. So grunge, alternative, indie. So
I think the conclusion here is glam metal sent us all running for a solution.
And we're all still here.
And we're all still here. Thank you very much. Okay, thanks for joining me, Liam. Yet
thanks
again,
as always.
Such a legend in your own right. Much respect. Lisa, Daniel, Andrew, and Craig behind me, thank you for joining us. We are here live, as a reminder, Thursdays, 4 p.m. Eastern. Please subscribe to Banger TV. We're almost at the 70,000 mark. Next week's show, Black Gaze. I'm going to figure out what the fuck that means. There we go. We got Lindsay Schoolcraft coming back to help me out with that. Again, live Thursdays, 4 p.m. Eastern. Thank you for joining us on Lock Horns. See you next time.